Hello there, it's Saturday 29th of February 2020, so the leap day, and I'm bringing this video to you. I've been slightly delayed by a very important family matter because I was looking at this a few days ago and wanting to broadcast it as soon as possible, but let's get to it now. Some very interesting things have happened. Okay, this video is titled "The Coronavirus Train is Leaving the Station." And one thing I noticed a few days ago, and this is on the main chart for total cases, okay, total world cases is this top line, which goes with grey purple. The China cases is the green line, which kind of overlaps it until recently, which is the green. And the Hubei province Wuhan cases are the red line, which obviously has dominated the whole thing up to now. And the rest of China, Shanghai, Beijing, etc., Guangdong province, is this line. And you can see that the Chinese lines have all been following a kind of an S-curve. Okay, so you had this enormous increase in cases at the end of January, early February. You had the jump in cases because of the clinically diagnosed ones. And then since then you've had a slowdown, because you've had basically a slowdown in the number of new cases per day and the percentage increase in new cases per day. So you've got this kind of S-curve. Now, one point about this is that Wuhan lockdown was on 23rd of January. There weren't many cases then, okay. 21st, there were only 282 cases, okay. So a couple of 3 days later, they locked down Wuhan, and still the cases, well, let's look at Wuhan itself, have gone to over 65,000 from this less than 1,000 that you had here. Now, we're in a very similar situation here with the rest of the world. Now, what I noticed about 3 days ago is that the rest of the world line, or rather the total world line, is pulling away from the China line. So this little wedge here is the cases in the rest of the world, this wedge here, which was barely kind of 1% of the total cases down here. So it was virtually superimposed on the China line, but now it really has pulled away. So the train for the rest of the world coronavirus epidemic has really left the station, and now you've got several thousand cases in the rest of the world. A couple of points to this really is that this bit of the graph here is quite resembling this bit of the graph here, and that's the kind of ominous thing. This was China and Wuhan at the end of January, from the 21st of January to, let's say, the 28th or 29th of January, and here you have coming to the end of February here. This is today, actually 29th of February, so this is going back to about the 20th of February. Very, very similar situation, and I wanted to see what that actually looked like. So this was my graph a day ago, actually. This was yesterday. Obviously it's expanded a little more since then, so I'm comparing now. I'm going to compare this bit to this bit, and what does it look like? Well, these are the cases in Wuhan, almost a perfect exponential rise. These are the cases in the rest of the world as they've evolved, quite close to an exponential rise, actually. Not as exact, because you've got multiple countries, multiple outbreaks, and this was really a single big outbreak in Wuhan city in China. So you had an exponent on this of 0.40. An exponent of 0.40 on the exponential graph. If it was 0.7, the cases will be doubling every single day. If it's 0.35, it'll be doubling about once every 2 days. 0.4 is about doubling every 1 and 3/4 days. So you can see really in 2 days you go from, say, 200, let's say 300 to 800. 2 days you go from 800 to 2,000. 2 days you go from 2,000 to 4,500. In 2 days you go from under 3,000 to over 6,000. So that works very well. On the rest of the world graph, yes, you've got an exponential fit again, but it's a little shallower. Yeah, the exponent here is 0.1239. Now that's about a sixth of 0.70 rather, which means 12 sixes are 72. Okay, it's a doubling about once every 6 days. So if you were to take, I don't know, any given day here, 1,000 cases, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, 4 days it goes to 2,000 cases. Down here it's going to be a bit slower. Okay, it's taken to get to from 500 to 1,000. It's probably taken about a week. So it is actually accelerating. It might be doubling about every 3 days now or something like that. So at some point I've actually taken this part of the graph and it does look a little worse, but it's a comparable thing to Wuhan. It's a slower expansion, but it's an exponential rise nevertheless. And here again, similar, that's the same thing, but with South Korea and Italy's cases on there, because South Korea and Italy have been contributing a lot towards this rest of the world graph lately. So yes, it does compare with the situation in Wuhan, not quite as drastic, but very similar in principle. And that's really alarming. Okay, let's have a look at this graph again and say what happened in Wuhan. You got the lockdown here, and you still got a massive expansion of cases. So here now, and this was when the rest of China was quarantined. Other cities in China were seriously quarantined once you got to mid-February, about 10th of February, 12th of February. And okay, that's had quite a good effect on the rest of China especially. You've got this nice S-curve, and this is what you really want. You want the curve to level out, of course. It's not leveled out quite as rapidly in Wuhan, but it's been forecastable. So my forecasts that I have done were based on these kind of trends. This is the falling daily percentage increase, which was way up here in the 50, 60, 70% per day. That's doubling more than once a day. And now it's down into the sort of 1% a day, 2% a day. And if you look at the deaths, it's a similar graph. Okay, deaths increasing at 50% a day, going down to 5, 4, 3, 2% a day. On a pretty good exponential decay fit. Now, my forecasts, my previous forecast was for the deaths to go to about 4,000. But actually I managed to update that again today. My forecast for the deaths is now standing at 3,800. Okay, so it went from sort of 3,500 to 4,400. Now it's down at about 3,800 because the slope of that line changes as you add more points. Okay, the equation changes slightly. So up to today's data, the deaths are about 3,850 for China. Okay, this is completely confined to China now, because it's only China that you can really forecast this way, because the rest of the world is taking off exponentially. And the total cases has converged to about 88,000, 89,000 for China. Now, this was based initially upon a global forecast, but this forecast is now going to be transferred to just China, because the rest of the world is not behaving like this. It looks like what we're going to get, actually, is let's have a look at this graph first. The daily new cases worldwide have overtaken the daily new China cases, and that's actually got worse recently. If I can find that graph, there's a lot of them. The daily new cases in the world have just got to 1,000. The daily new cases in China, this is on a log graph, have got down into the sort of 300s. This is the rest of the world, which is going up in a straight line, which is again is a proof of an exponential trend. Let's have a look at the rest of the world trend. It's actually increasing faster than the exponential curve that I have there, which is very, very alarming. If I look at this one, okay, again you've got, this is the log chart, which is the equivalent of this one, only on a log chart. You can see that it's actually ahead of the exponential trend slightly at the moment, and it's actually really pulling away from it. This is really quite alarming. If I take some more recent points, rather than taking the whole of the cases, if I just go back to well, here you are again. If I go back, actually even to day 3, which was 23rd of January, you can see you've got pretty much a straight line, and you've got 0.1239 as the slope for that graph, although the slope here is getting a little steeper. So that's more than a doubling every 6 days now. That's very alarming. And okay, that's the overall graph of the rest of the world cases. And again, it's very, very close to an exponential fit. Looking at some individual countries, Italy, it's kind of been almost a straight line, but yes, it probably will end up being an exponential fit. The exponential fit is getting ahead of the trend, actually. So it's kind of stopping and starting a little bit at the moment. If I put, say, a polynomial trend on it, it's more like a kind of parabolic fit. That sort of thing also applies to Korea, where there have been some very severe increases in the cases recently. So South Korea, we've seen a very sharp increase in cases. These are the daily new cases, which have also been increasing sharply. Korea South is on a roughly parabolic fit, actually. Because you sometimes, if that's this is the exponential fit, it's obviously getting a little bit ahead of the actual trend, because you're having some stopping and starting. You're getting these sort of what would you say, some outbreaks and they're closed down a little bit, and you're getting some new outbreaks and they're closed down a little bit. And what that tends to give you is a slightly variable line on the log chart. If it was exponential, this would be an exact straight line. And you had a kind of an exponential outbreak here, and maybe a little bit of a slowdown. You've got another little exponential outbreak here. I wouldn't say it's little, because the overall slope here is 0.4, which is as bad as Wuhan, actually, which was also 0.4. So again, that's a doubling about every 2 days. I was going to have a look on here just at the last few days and see if I can get a fit on this to an exponential fit. Polynomial fit almost always fits at some point, because you can always find a parabola that roughly fits. An exponential fit, it's not quite exponential. So it's kind of a polynomial fit. This is a little bit like Singapore was, actually, only much, much, much steeper. So what we're looking for and hoping for is this is going to turn into an S-curve, and that this is going to be contained. Once it starts to be contained, you get a deceleration and you get a topping out like you have in China. But unfortunately, I think what the trend is going to be like, let's have a look at Singapore, actually. Singapore was quite interesting. Singapore was following a kind of a quadratic curve. You had these little S-curves, these little tiny exponential increases where you got an outbreak,